Professor, how's the week been for you? Have you moved to your new place or are you still in the hotel?
No, I moved. Tiring week. It's over.
You can see why it will be tiring.
Yes. All right, let's see how many of you.
Afternoon,
Wait
Prof.
2 more minutes and then we start. Hello. All right, so even though 4 of you are still missing, I would say that we start because otherwise we eat up too much time. Okay, so today, if I remember correctly, we're left with the task of explaining the title of the course, namely the question of being. What is meant by this title? What is the question of being? Now, understanding this is very important to understand how we're gonna approach the work of Plotinus at hand. Once we've done that, we'll go into the clarification of some keywords that are essential for us to start opening up a dialogue with the text at hand. Okay, let's start from an elucidation of the title of the course, the question of being. What is this question about? Or what does this question ask? Now, any question, insofar as it is a question, asks towards something, right? If I say, for example, the question of the demographic crisis, I am asking towards the situation of the demographics of a certain place and what this will entail in the long run for that same place. If I ask the question of the best political system, I'm asking towards the problem of how one should organize social life and what any given organization entails. If I ask the question of being, what am I asking towards? We have to clarify the term being in order to acquire some clarity on what this question is asking. Being. What do we think of when we pronounce this word. In English, I can say that anything I run into is a being, right? I am a being. Each one of you is a being. My dog is a being. By the way, he's here with us. A chair is a being of sort. A tree is a being. So in English, with the word being, we mean, maybe in an odd way, but in a quite clear way, things. Each thing, each single thing is a being. However, with the word being in English, we mean also the infinitive of the verb to be. You know what the infinitive is? The infinitive form of a verb. For example, I am. I'm using the verb to be in the indicative present at the first person. But can I say I being or I to be? Can I say that?
No.
Yeah, I know it's an invalid file. I don't understand why. So maybe what I'll do, I'll send it to you guys through some other channel, and then we'll figure it out from there. Okay, let's go back to what I was saying. Can I say I being or I to be?
No.
No. Why not? Why can't I say that?
Because it's grammatically incorrect.
Yeah, but what is it that is incorrect?
You're just
I think for English you require.
What?
I think for English you require from I am going to be, or I want to be, or I'm going to be something. So you have to be a being first in order to transition from one being to another being. You can't enter the state of being from nothing.
Okay, one can put it this way, but more simply, one could say that in English, like in Italian, in French, in Greek, in whatever, the infinitive form of the verb, to be or being, because in English, being can also be the infinitive form of the verb. The infinitive form of the verb in English represents a grade 0, a grade with no specification, which doesn't tell you who is, when this thing is, in which way this thing is, and so on and so forth. Okay, so for example, I do say you eat, but I cannot say you eating or you to eat. Or even less can I say to eat, and that's it, without specifying who is eating, how is eating, where is eating, and so on and so forth. So the infinitive is the grade 0 of the verb. Now, when we say the question of being, what are we thinking of when we say being? Are we thinking of a single being or being at the infinitive? What would you say?
Infinitive.
Why?
Because we're talking about a state, right? It's not, we're not referring to any individual, generalizing it to, yeah.
Precisely. Precisely. We are thinking of that possibility, of that ground 0, out of which anything can be said to be a being. Now, that is a very strange question to ask indeed. One could say that what I'm asking towards is just an abstraction. It's just the vaguest generalization out of the concreteness of each single being. But is it so? Let's look at it carefully. How could it be an abstraction? How the objection that this question is unsubstantial could stand? Well, one could say, look, what you are looking for, what you are asking towards, this being in the infinitive, so to say, is nothing but the result of a process of abstraction whereby, starting from the givenness of each single being, you arbitrarily imagine that there exists somewhere a general overarching being out of which all these particular beings get their legitimacy. Do you follow? That could be the objection. But what can we counter object to this objection? Well, something very simple. The fact that every time I say a being, I'm saying something. And every time that I say something, I'm saying of that something that it is. And that it is precisely this or that. For example, let's talk about a particular being. Let's talk about tree. I look at a tree and I say, this is a tree. So I have said something about something. And I've been able to say something about something because I grasped it as something already. In other words, whatever I say about anything, in the example about the tree, is nothing but the manifestation, so to say, of the fact that I had already in front of me grasped this thing as a thing.
So, Prof, does the thing or being means the ideas you mentioned last week?
Well, no, we'll go there later. We'll go there later, okay? Let's stay on this first.
Okay.
Let's stay on this first. It is connected to that, but it's connected to that in a particular way I don't want to rush to now. I want you to stay focused on this thing that might seem quite obstruse, but is in reality the most concrete thing that you can ever realize in your life. So, let me repeat. The moment I say anything, the moment I utter any word about whatever is in front of me, this utterance is nothing but the manifestation of the fact that I have something in front of me. Or put in other words, or the fact that something appears to me as something. I want to stress this fact that something appears to me as something. Because this is the typicality, the typical trait of the human being. Dogs don't have anything in front of them. A dog doesn't perceive a tree as a tree. A dog doesn't see a tree. A dog doesn't see a wall. A dog doesn't see a flower. a dog reacts to certain impulses that are the result of chemical processes that work through his neural receptors. Okay? But a dog is unable to say, this is this. You can tell me, how do you know? It's very simple in reality. You don't need to do experiments with sensors in the head of the dog, like the scientists, certain scientists do. You just need to look at how dogs behave. How do you know that a human being knows what a couch is? Because he goes around and says, this is a couch? What is it the first thing that...
Hi, Prof. To answer your question, I just have a few ideas. I think that to know that the couch, for human to know there's a couch, I think there's a few very important elements. One is the linguistic representation, and the other one is the visual linguistic representation. For you to know a couch, for you to classify, for this subject classified as a couch. The second thing I think is very important is a mental association of a neural association. So that means that we associate these objects, associate certain aspects or certain features of this object, and associate certain linguistic representation as a couch. I think, and the last thing I think is like we actually for humans we not only see the couch as a couch, just recognize objects as a couch by itself. I also recognize the set of services that it provides, so that we react to that as well. That overall wise, then we actually able to recognize that's a couch.
Yeah, okay, but with this you described at most the mechanism. You've not told me anything about the root of this mechanism. Because if you refer to neural functions, also the dog has neural functions. In fact, dogs, sharks, eagles, cats have neural functions that in many ways are much more complex than our neural functions. And they're able to sense things that we don't even fathom. My dog knows when I'm near the gate. Even when I'm 1 kilometer away, he knows I'm around. I don't. So if the specificity of the ability to recognize things, to see things as things, resides in some kind of neural function, which then is connected and based on sensory, purely sensorial perception, then animals beat us 10-0. But again, the question, much more simple. How do we know that the human being sees the couch as the couch and the dog doesn't?
Because we have grasped it in advance.
What
We
again?
have grasped the couchness of the couch.
Yeah, but that's the conclusion that we reach. But the first observation that we can stay at, how do we know that? How can we say, look, the dog doesn't see that as a couch?
I think even before seeing a couch as a couch, it must first appear to us as something, which is already part of our language. So whenever we look at anything that we do not understand or have not encountered, then we always ask the question, what is that thing? And I think that's the presupposition here, which is that the thing already appears to us as a thing, but the same cannot be said.
Yeah, it appears already. Okay, fine. Everything appears to us as a thing, which is not what happens to the dog, all right? But that's another problem. What I'm asking here, how do we know that other living things do not see what surrounds them as things?
Prof, I think the way you name the question got the problem is like you mentioned I code is like you mentioned is like how the dog don't know the things around them, but we cannot tell. Maybe they recognize the things around us in different way. Like the
No,
couch, you can see.
But that's precisely what I'm asking. I'm asking, how do we know? How can we say that the dog doesn't see things?
Because they act different way like us. For example, we met the couch, then we sit down. But the dog, he just
Exactly,
think that's
because they don't have a behavior. Animals don't have a behavior. Animals react, they adapt, they don't behave. Behaving is something typical of the human being and presupposes the fact that you understand things as things. Let me give you an example. A dog introduced to a bathroom, what is he going to do in this bathroom after sniffing around?
Probably sleep.
Sleep, probably. Once the dog is comfortable and he knows, let's say, he feels that there is no danger in that place, he sleeps. A human being introduced in a bathroom is going to sleep in that bathroom? I hope not. Well, unless he's locked in the bathroom for 3 days, of course, at the end he sleeps there, right? But he knows that he shouldn't sleep in a bathroom.
Yeah, but if it's a child that doesn't know that knowledge, that haven't been taught that knowledge, then wouldn't that child stay in the bathroom as well? And that's a human being.
An infant, yes. An infant, yes, of course. But the difference between the human being and the other creatures is that the human being is born already with the potentiality of relating to anything as things, whereas a dog doesn't have that potentiality.
Okay, understood.
And by the way, yes.
Can I just clarify what does it mean to as relating to it as things? Because we're talking about.
What does it mean? It means that you don't pee on your bed.
Sorry?
It means that you don't pee on your bed. It means that you don't pee on your bed. It means that you don't chew the sponge with which you wash yourself under the shower. It means that you don't sniff around. That's what it means. It means that you hold a behavior. Behavior means to have something in a certain way. That's what behaving means. You hold a behavior that indicates the fact that for you, whatever you're behaving towards is a something. Is a something that commands a certain behavior and not another behavior.
So what about like animals that have, say, associations with, say, their favorite toy, or like the area that they like to rest in, or animals that have been trained not to, I don't know, pee, the same way that children are trained to go to the toilet in that sense?
That's a conditioning. Children are not trained, children are educated. An animal is trained. There is a huge difference there. None of you has been trained. You have been educated. And the difficulty of those who educated you was encountered when you started asking why. A dog doesn't ask you why.
I think I would like to raise a few concerns about what you mentioned. Okay, the behavior-wise, you mentioned that, okay, I think come back to the very recent point you mentioned, is that humans are educated and animals are not. But actually there's a very famous experiment that they actually raised a chimpanzee as a normal child for a very long period of time. And the chimpanzee eventually knows how to behave like eventually like his set of behavior are resemble to human to a very much extent. And the other thing I would like to
I don't
talk
know
about
Yeah, go.
yeah, maybe
Go ahead.
maybe I'll Google the experiment and try to find. The other one is like we realized there's also a finding that there was a human that didn't live with the human society for most of his life. Then he actually lived with the animals, and he does not. Then the human actually does not exhibit any human behaviors. I think, and like psychologically or neuroscientifically proven that humans are only different from animals, because of the human society actually.
Okay.
Yeah, because human society inculcate or condition
Okay.
to
First
human
of
in
all,
this way.
you must explain to me how come that human society has come up with human society, because there are other animals that live societally, and yet none of them has come up with what we come up with. There are other animals who can be called metaphorically social, like sheep, like many big primates, like the gorillas or the chimpanzee, like, I don't know, wolves, and yet none of them have developed anything that even remotely resembles human society. So human society is the result of something, and we're looking for that something. Second, the experiment of the chimpanzee. I don't know this particular experiment, but I've read of a few others, the most recent of which is the experiment with Coco, a big gorilla, who even managed to learn a few words, I think 100 words or something. Now, what has been noticed with Coco? It has been noticed that for Coco, words are associations of a sound to a thing. That's it. For us, words are not association to a sound to a thing. For us, words are always part of a context. We understand the context. Think of Chinese. Chinese has many similar sounds for a variety of things. How do they differentiate what that same sound each time means? By the context. Another sign that Coco doesn't understand things as things. When Coco was given a sponge, they taught her how to wash herself. A few days later, Coco was seen playing with the sponge and tearing it apart. And when she was asked, why do you tear the sponge apart? Coco said, fun. If you see a human being that tears a sponge apart, if this human being is not an infant anymore, you think that there is something wrong with this human being. That this human being has lost it. Correct? So the ability of animals to acquire behaviors that resemble human behaviors is very limited in reality. It is only by an effort made by us to read in them what is human that we can say, oh, this animal behaves like me. No, you are reading your behavior in what it does. That animal behaves like an animal, but you say it doesn't behave.
Prof.
Okay.
Sorry.
Wait a second. Let's finish answering all the questions. Otherwise, the second question had to do with what was the second question you asked? The second question had to do with the society thing, right? All the animals, the human being is what it is because of society. Yes, of course, because of language. The point is that language is not the result of the human beings creating language, nor is society something that slowly, by accumulation of notions of ideas, shapes us. It does that, yes, but it does that, it's capable of doing that only because originally the human being is born with the ability, again, we go back to the same thing, to understand things as things, hence to behave. Now, what does this behaving point to? And this recognizing things as things point to? These two things point to the fact that the human being, unlike other animals, approaches whatever he approaches as already subsumed in the dimension of meaningfulness. For us, what surrounds us is an ensemble of meanings. Each thing that we run into is for us a thing, that is to say, is something invested with meaning. Something that means something. Not means something in the terms of concept, but in the terms of the behavior it commands from us and the associations it elicits. So that in the living room, I do certain things. In the bedroom, I do other things. In the bathroom, I do yet other things. Outside, I dress and behave in a certain way, which is different from how I dress and behave inside, and so on and so forth. For any animal, all this is impossible to grasp.
So I think.
Okay. Yes. Now, other questions.
I think animal, at least some animal also can also behave like to recognize what this place for. For example, like my cat, without any training or education, but my cat, he knows exactly where to sleep, like which is the bedroom and which one is the toilet. He knows exactly that, and he will not pee in the bedroom or sleep in the toilet. I think, I mean, at least cats have this ability.
You think that he knows. You think that he knows. He does certain things because he does certain things, not because he knows. You see, I mean, we have to be very careful, guys. Unfortunately, you have been educated with the idiotic BBC documentaries that humanize animal life. An animal does what it does because it does what it does. That's it. Not because he knows. Knowing is another level. Knowing means that you have the ability to reflect on what you're doing. You have the ability to realize that you're doing something. In no animal, and I grew up with animals, in no animal have I seen the bare trace of this self-reflexivity that instead you see in the human being all the time. In fact, when you don't see the reflexivity in the human being, you think that you have to do with a human being that has some mental challenge. Okay, so in other words, I knew that this was going to be a point of contention. It's a point of contention due to the fact that unfortunately, through an unthinking and simplistic approach fed by nature documentaries and a quite reckless way of describing things, we tend to read in the animals what is familiar to us without realizing that that's human, it's not animal. In no possible way. Also my cat, I have a cat, she sleeps only in a certain room. Why? Because that's what she does. That's it.
So
but the very fact, wait, let me finish. The very fact that she sleeps just in that room tells you the fact that we are not in front of a behavior. We're in front of a habit in which the animal is caught. Because if necessity arises and you tell me, look, for tonight you have to sleep on the balcony. I sleep on the balcony. Try tell the cat, look, for tonight you have to sleep on the balcony. Good luck. the cat will try all she can to go back to the place where she uses to sleep. In other words, going back to the distinction between us and them, we behave. They are caught in habits. Behaving means that we hold meaningful relations with what surrounds us. Holding meaningful relations with what surrounds us points to the fact that for us, whatever surrounds us is things. For them, there is no thing. Okay? All right, question now.
Okay, Prof. So does the EQ is the same for human with because of the human is educated? IQ, I mean.
The human is educated because it's capable of recognizing things as things, because it's capable of meaning. Education is what? Education is the bringing out. Educare means to bring out what we already have inside. And what is it that we already have inside? The possibility for meaning. The fact that we live in meaning. Okay?
Okay. So does IQ is the same we already have in mind, right?
But you shouldn't talk about IQ. IQ is another idiotic term forged by pseudoscientists who think that everything can be measured. All these things, IQ, animals behaving, or animals grasping meaning, or blah, 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 blah. When you go read the actual papers and the actual researches that are the basis of these conclusions, you realize that they're all wrought with false assumptions. Okay?
Okay.
The
Sorry,
IQ thing doesn't
excuse
mean
me.
anything.
So instead of IQ, let's use the term cognitive ability.
But
so,
also that you must explain precisely what, wait. Also in that case, you must explain carefully what you mean by that. Usually by cognitive ability, two things are conflated. One, meaningfulness. The other one, the acquisition of sensorial data. And usually, when you read papers by psychologists and psychiatrists or neuroscientists, the balance swings towards the acquisition of sensorial data. If we stay at that, it is, as I said before, animals beat us 10-0. If intelligence, if what we call intelligence is the result of the acquisition of data, okay, through sensorial capabilities, then these scientists should explain to me how come that a shark is not more intelligent than me? How come that my dog is not more intelligent than me? And yet, I mean, my dog is capable of acquiring data that by myself, I'm not able to acquire. So what is it that we mean by cognitive ability? That's a question I pose to you. What do you mean?
So maybe the ability to, how do we process the information after we acquire it instead of how do we acquire it or something like that. Maybe it's how do we understand what's around us instead of how do we look at things around us.
But then you go back to the question that I'm trying to pose to you, the question of meaningfulness. It is a fact that the human being relates to whatever he relates to through meaning. That's a fact.
But if you think about it, like saying that humans already have the potential to see things as things is already a very Socratic value, right?
Socratic value. What do you mean by that?
Like Socrates, he always argues that like humans are how should I say, remembering the knowledge. Like it's a recollection instead of we acquire it from the environment and acquire it through education. As you said just now, education is nothing more than something that helps us to remember or recollect what we have before.
Yeah, you made a correct connection. Now the point is to see whether this is just an argument, a hypothesis, or whether this is an evidence. Is it evident to you that nobody taught to you what a tree is? To me, it is evident that nobody taught me what a tree was. They taught me the name of the thing. That's all they could teach me, the name. But if as a child I had not been able to recognize that thing and to separate from that other thing, there would have been no way that they could have taught me, oh, this is a tree. So the fact that we do live in the presence of things is a fact.
But wouldn't that become more like the ability to extrapolate? So somebody told you once that something is a tree, then you are able to extrapolate from that.
Let's put what that somebody told you. He told you the name. He taught you how, in the language that you were speaking with that person, that thing is called. He hasn't taught you the thing. He has taught you the name. But you had to know that this is a thing. Even as a kid, you had to know that this is a thing. I'm just at odd as for its name. In fact, what happens? It happens that oftentimes kids, very small kids, come up with names of their own for things. That's a sign. It's a clear sign that the kid, A, nobody has taught him that that's a thing. B, being impatient or I don't know why, not trusting whatever the adults were saying, came up with a name of his own.
And I think a child also knows to clarify. So he asked
Yeah,
for the
of
name
course.
so he can tell people what it is that he saw or what is this thing he made use of or came into contact.
Of course. Now, an objection that you could raise is that, oh, maybe if you want to stay at the level of if you want to object the fact that things for the human beings are primary pieces of evidence, you could say, oh, maybe, and this is already a more complex argument than that offered by the neuroscientists or psychologists of sort. You could say, oh, maybe a kid in its very first few years of life, through hidden processes of association, comes to realize that, oh, whatever has branches and leaves and a bark and is a tree. In other words, you could say the notion of tree is reached by a process of accumulative induction.
So machine learning?
Sort of. What is the problem there, though?
It assumes that he already knows the leaves and the branches.
Exactly. You go back to square one. So let's go back. And then I go to Joel, who has raised a hand since quite a while. But let's go back to what I was saying in the beginning. Beings, being. Being understood as the infinitive is that capability, is that dimension, let's call it, out of which we can run into whatever we run into as many beings, that is to say, as many things. So being, the question of being, is ultimately the question regarding the overarching meaning of beings. How are beings possible as beings? Okay? The question of being is the question regarding the condition of possibility for beings to be beings. Okay? Now let's go to Joel first, and then three other of you have raised a hand. Joel, Amelia, and Shah. So Joel first.
Yeah. I think just to clarify my understanding with you, and hopefully that of the rest of the class, it appears that there is a bit of a conflation in that we haven't separated between what we're talking about, being, and cognitive ability. So my understanding is that cognitive ability can exist on a spectrum, which is easy to ascertain and determine through observation of specific behaviors. So that's not in contention. But instead, now we're talking about having a certain intuition toward meaning. So in a sense, as behavior that is observed reflexive or because of a deeper understanding. And this is a lot more difficult to ascertain because it is subjectively rather than scientifically determined, because it's grounded in intention.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's subjective. I would say that it's more difficult to be determined because it's the basis for any other determination. I can talk of cognitive abilities already because I understand something as ability and something as cognitive. The question is, where does this understanding come from? How come that I can grasp something as cognitive and a dog can't? That's your question. So the cognitive abilities, yes, we can study them, but they're based on that underlying dimension, which is the dimension on which the human being lives. Why is it so difficult for us to even start grasping the question around this dimension? Because it's the most fundamental thing. It's the most basic thing. And as anything that is most basic, is difficult to become fully aware of. The very way in which I'm not aware of the fine movements of my body when I walk. And yet, without those fine movements, I couldn't move. Right? So, just to give you an analogy and to try to explain why this question is so odd in many ways, because it forces us to look at something that stands as the first level for anything else to be built on. Okay?
Yeah. And I'm also trying to think of, is there like any concrete way to establish this difference, and whether it may be reflected in an ability to meaningfully break from instinct? So that referring to, yeah, because it demonstrates an ability, number one, to prioritize motivation based on intention, purpose, context, and having some form of will.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's a question founded on the distinction between behavior and instinct. Now, again, unfortunately, through the various documentaries that you're accustomed to, or even just not documentaries, but even the parlance that you are bombarded with at university and other places, and in our world in general, you are convinced that the human being has instinct like all other animals. The human being doesn't have any instinct. It's not me who says that. Already Freud had understood that the human being at most has impulses, not instinct. What is the difference? The difference is that an animal, being completely caught in its instinct, does certain things automatically. The human being a living thing, hence, in many ways, a biological entity, the human being too has impulses, has this thrust to do certain things, right? To have sex, to eat, to drink, to sleep. But the human being behaves also in relation to these things.
Hold on, Prof. I'm guessing that there is an implied, what do you call that? You're implying that characteristic to instinct is a concept of irresistibility, meaning that if it is instinct, it cannot be resisted. Whereas impulses are things that can be overridden based on context.
Yeah, on the one hand. But the other thing I'm going at is the fact that the human being can resist what otherwise would be instinct. He can resist them because the human being can see them as from the outside. In other words, when I have the urge to sleep, okay, and I resist it, who am I or what am I? That urge or the one that resisted? The one that is resisting it. The dog instead, who sleeps when he has the urge to sleep, is just that urge. Period. So this distinction points to the fact that the human being lives at a level of behaving towards things and behaving towards himself. This implies that the human being lives a step removed from himself and from things. He can see himself as himself and things as things. Okay, so the question that you posed in the beginning, it allows us to look at the problem and the difference between us and them precisely through this fine divide between instincts, in which the animals are caught, and impulses, which are not instincts anymore, because we can look at them as urges. Okay, now, when did this differentiation happen, and how did it happen? That I don't know. That I don't know. For sure, what we can say for sure is that the human being emerges when this differentiation emerges. Before that, there is no human being. But that differentiation rests on the fact that at a certain point, this living thing started seeing himself and seeing things. So this living thing stepped out of the level of instinctuality. Again, how that happened, I don't know. For sure, though, the stepping out already tells you that from that moment on, this living thing lives at another level compared to all other living things. And that other level is the level of meaningfulness, or the level of being, namely the ability to say, this is, that is, I am, which a dog is not capable of doing. Okay? Then, other question by Amelia?
Okay, hello, Prof. I wanted to ask you about back to the dog question. So, is it possible that we recognize things by its function, its usefulness to us, and if two things provide the same function, then we group it together, and we are able to know things as things because this knowledge that existed from the very beginning was passed down through generations, and we are the only ones who are able to think because we are the only one who created this system of passing down the knowledge through the education system.
Yeah, but well, first of all, the first man, as we were saying with Joel, the first man that saw things as things, was he less a man than me because he knew less things, fewer things? No, he was fully a human being. So the point is that you can see the function of something because you see that something.
So isn't
The
everything
dog
through
doesn't see any function
experimentation?
No, you can experiment because you understand something as functional, not the other way around. Why don't other animals, well, the example that I often make, the example of the difference between a stick and a branch. Okay. When is it that the stick emerges as stick, as a thing?
When in comparison to the branch that we remember, it is thinner.
No, when the baboon that used that stick or that branch put it aside and said, I'm going to use this tomorrow because it's very useful. In other words, in that moment, that stick stopped being a branch and has become a tool. But in order for that thing to become a tool, what was needed was the fact that that baboon all of a sudden realized this is a thing, different from all other things, and all the rest is things as well. And how do we know that he recognized it as a thing, namely a tool? Because he put it aside. Now, have you ever seen an animal putting stuff aside as tools? No, I haven't. Nobody has. One could say, yeah, but animals that live with us do get used to certain things. Yes, because they get used to it, because we train them. But the animal left by itself doesn't recognize anything as a tool, doesn't put things aside. And hence, it creates no material history. Whereas the human being is recognizable also by the material history it has left behind. Okay, so to go back to your question, true, we do relate to things as functional in terms of their functionality for our goals. But this implies that A, we understand something as functionality, B, we understand most fundamentally the existence of goals that we want to reach. Again, both these things point to the dimension of meaningfulness, which is completely alien to the animal. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Welcome. Now we have Shah.
Hi, Prof. Actually, there's a lot of stuff. Kind of got lost. Kind of got lost in some of it. But I think what I want to try to clarify is, well, it's going to build upon another question too. But the difference between this from the start, the trained and educated. Whereas I'm trying to find reasons why there's a difference. Is it because there's an imaginative aspect? Is that humans are able to imagine, and that when you use the word see, you really mean imagine and make of something? Because like blind people don't see, you know. So like I just wanna clarify. Like,
yeah, of course. See, by see, I don't mean necessarily the visual, the sense of vision, right? Because blind people don't see, of course. But yet blind people live like all other human beings in a world of images. And this world of images appears in the fact that they relate to things meaningfully. They behave towards things. Okay? So of course, when I say seeing, one shouldn't understand the mere sense of vision. Seeing is the ability to understand things as things, which also blind people have. Of course they do, because they're human beings like us. Okay?
Right. So, but like, how's training different from education in a sense? Because I guess both of these,
training
like,
is different. Go ahead.
Yeah, because in a way, both of them is like are based on associations, right? Like
It's
like
not
if
association.
yeah.
Look, if education was like training, we couldn't have classes. What I'm doing here, and what every teacher does, is to, well, not every teacher I should say, but that's what they should do, is to try to open up new horizons and make students question their previous understandings. Can you do that with a dog? Of course not. You can't. You train a dog. How do you train a dog? By conditioning it. How do you condition a dog? By establishing a pattern of A equals B. So,
give them food.
Treat in my hand means that you have to sit down. If I tell you paw, and you give me paw, then you're gonna get a candy. That's training. Okay? The human being is not trained.
You're breaking up.
The human being is educated.
Prof, yeah, I couldn't hear like the last minute.
Yeah, no, I
think
was
you
saying
got
that.
cut off. Okay.
Yeah, let me say it again. I was saying that the animals are trained, and in what does training consist? In a process of conditioning, whereby to A corresponds B. Okay? If I say sit, and my dog sits, paw, and he gives me paw, then I give him the treat. And he has learned this very simple process so well that when he wants the treat, he sits down and gives me paw. I'm not saying that animals are like machines, because they have a sort of initiative. But I'm saying that they live in a very close circle of connections. And in this very close circle of connection, you can train them. The human being doesn't live in a closed circle of connections. The human being lives in a free space of free associations. And that's why the human being is educated. If you try to teach a kid, sit down, he sits down, and then you give him milk, maybe he's gonna do it the first week. Then as soon as he's able to not even speak, but just to be a bit more independent, he will start and come up with tricks. And then once he's able to speak, if you insist on training him, he will start asking you, why? Why shall I sit to get my milk? Why can't I get my milk standing? At that point, your task is to explain to him, well, because, you know, that's the way it is done, and blah, 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 blah. And then he will ask, why is done that way? Why not that other way? An animal doesn't do all these things. Now, answering these questions and convincing the human being and coming up with reasons for why we do A instead of B is part of the process of educating. So I hope this makes it clear in which sense education is completely different from training.
Right. So okay. So is it safe to say that the ability to question things is a part of it, of being a being?
Of course, yes, we can question things because we already live in the dimension of being, that is in the dimension of meaningfulness.
Right.
Otherwise, we couldn't.
Okay. So the potential matters too, because like as you said, an infant is, well, not questioning stuff. It acts like an animal. Right.
Yeah, at least to a certain extent. Also there, it would be curious to see to which extent an infant is already capable of understanding things.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, I don't know whether researches have been made in that direction or not. Okay, so Elliot has a question.
So I was wondering if, I mean, along that spectrum of, cognitive ability, so we're talking about infants and that they haven't reached that point, right? So what about like people who are mentally disabled? Are they any less human?
No, of course they're not any less human. The point is there to understand how disability is defined. And usually disability is defined as the lacking as a sort of lacking of normality. So the problem becomes, what is normality? Okay, what is normality? In our current understanding of normality for the human being, we define normality for the human being within a certain parameter of IQ. And what is this IQ? Something calculable that responds to certain fixed parameters, according to which, if you're able to do calculations, if you're able to do this, if you're able to do that, then you are intelligent. In other words, what it means to be a human being is defined through the establishment of a certain normality. Are we sure that that normality defines actually what the human being is? I'm not sure of that. In fact, I strongly doubt it. If instead we say that the human being resides mostly in the ability of behaving freely within the dimension of meaningfulness, then of course a mentally disabled person has that ability. It has that ability unfolding in a weird way, in a way that you wouldn't expect, but it still has that ability. In that sense, is a full human being, is fully a human being. In fact, you can be sure of the fact that there is a human being precisely for the fact that whatever he does looks strange to you. Whereas nobody has ever seen a mentally disabled dog or a mentally disabled giraffe. Why? Because dogs and giraffe, to begin with, don't live at the level of the mental, don't live at the level of the spirit, Hegel would have said. The human being does. And from within that level, some of us experience other possibilities of that level that then modern psychology has rushed to define deviant. By the way, if you want to see how problematic the catalogation and the labeling of mental disabilities is, you should go read Foucault. Let me write it down for you.
I heard there was a story of a person admitting himself into a mental health hospital just to do an experiment. No matter what he did, he could not get himself out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, read Michel Foucault. In many ways, the catalogation and the definition of mental disability and sicknesses is nothing but the mirror of what gets established as the normality. In the Middle Ages, what we now call mental disabled were called inspired saints. In Russia, up to the 19th century, the children of Christ were people who lived a very extravagant life, who uttered things that didn't make any immediate meaning, and yet were deemed the voice of Christ. Those same people now will be deemed crazy. Who is right? The behavior of samurais who, for a matter of honor, open up their belly would be considered by today's normality the behavior of a morbid mind. And yet, for the Japanese, has been for centuries the peak of heroism. The behavior of a Buddhist monk that closes himself up in utter silence and meditation, by the standards of modern psychology, would be deemed as the manifestation of a pathologically introverted character. And yet it has represented the pillar of an entire civilization for 2+ millennia. So who's right? In other words, going back to the question of the disabled people, mentally disabled people, yes, of course, they are human beings. And we're to be careful on what we define as mentally disabled. Because more often than not, these definitions are nothing but the mirror of what the society at the time in history deems to be the normality. And usually what is deemed to be the normality is nothing but the expression of relations of power that are enforced also through relations of values. Okay? Yeah, it sounds very Nietzsche-like, because Nietzsche was a genius, so I've learned something. That's why one reads. In any case, if you're curious about this thing, do read Foucault. And Foucault, of course, is deeply influenced by Nietzsche. He has put many of Nietzsche's intuitions to good use. Okay. Any other question? Okay. So if there are no more questions, let me wrap things up for today. The main thing that I want you to understand is that the question of being is the question asking towards the general meaning of things. Now, every great thinker comes up with an explanation, so to say, of what things are, which tells us what that great thinker understood being to be. So, as we will see next week, for the greatest thinker of the Western tradition, namely Plato, being is the idea. And we will see what it means. So, asking the question of being in relation to a given thinker, in our case Plotinus, means to ask, how did Plotinus understand being? We know by now, tentatively, that being is that underlying dimension out of which and thanks to which the various things are, the various beings are. The question is, what is the thing? What is the ultimate foundation of each thing, for each thing to rest on? Okay? All right. So I would cut it off here for now. For the next meeting, which is on Thursday, I suppose you're going to have questions. So do feel free to start with your questions, and then we are going to go ahead and talk about a keyword, which is the word idea, and possibly the other keyword, that is the word logos. Okay? And then next week, we'll start finally reading the treatise together. But first, we need to clarify these few words. So for our next meeting, if you have questions, please prepare them and ask them at the beginning of class. And then we go ahead to clarify the word idea and the word logos. So in that sense, I would recommend you also to reread the document that I shared with you already on idea and logos. Okay? All right.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Professor. Thank you,
Bye.
Professor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bye
Bye,
bye.
everyone.
Bye, Professor.
Bye.
Thanks for educating us.
Welcome.
Goodbye.